So last night at my house for Halloween, my 17-year-old daughter, who's a senior in high school, and I had a bet. The bet was that I would have candy and I would have copies of my poetry books. And we'd see which one the kids wanted most. Dad, you're not that cool. The kids are not going to want your books. They're going to want candy. Probably about an hour into the night, kids were lined up out the door. Is this the author's house? We want poetry books. So I won the bet, and I got the last crumble cookie. Recently, I was going through airport security, and TSA flagged my suitcase. Apparently, an Emmy is a weapon. Gold, copper, and nickel. And so she takes it out the bag, she looks at it, and she inspects it. And then she congratulates me. And then she puts it back in the bag. And when she does that, she sees some copies of my poetry books, and she says, "You write books?" And I said, "Yeah." And I say, do you like poetry? And she says what most people say, "No." And so I immediately recite a poem by my favorite poet, Langston Hughes. Folks, birthing is hard and dying is mean, so why not get yourself a little loving in between? So she kind of laughs, and I say, "So you do like poetry?" And so I reach in my bag, and I hand her a book, and I autograph it, and she smiles, and immediately one of her coworkers rushes over and says, "You can't accept that." And she looks at me, and she's got this look like, "I don't think I can take this gift." And then they have this conversation trying to decide whether they can accept this collection of poetry, and then they call the supervisor over. And she comes over, and she's mean looking. She reminds me of my AP English teacher in 12th grade who gave me an F on my thesis paper because she said that Chinua Achebe, who I had written about, was not an American author, and my paper was so good there's no way I could have written it. And so the supervisor starts talking with them, and they try to hand her the book, but she will not touch the book. And then they ask her to weigh in on the decision, and she can't make up her mind. And finally, they all come over to me and they say, "We're going to make an exception this time." And she smiles, and I walk away, and I can't help but think how we've come to a point in our lives where we've forgotten how beautiful poetry is, where we don't fathom it or don't understand it. How have we arrived at this point where we don't remember that poetry is the thing that allowed us to learn how to read, write, speak, and listen? Remember the fairy tales and the nursery rhymes? Remember the songs and the poems that your mothers and grandmothers sang to you on nights when thunder ravaged the sky? How have we forgotten that it's always been about poetry? Poetry is the thing that has made us feel better about who we are. And so I come here today to remind you, as Margaret Atwood said, a word after a word after a word is power. I come here today to remind you that we need poetry. I grew up in a place called New York City. On the Upper West Side, my parents were in graduate school at a place called Teachers College, Columbia University. I was 3 years old, and my mother read to me. She read to me poems by Lucille Clifton, poems by Nikki Giovanni, Spin a Soft Black Song, poems by my favorite poet at 3 years old, Dr. Seuss. There was a particular book that I loved, and I memorized it at 3 years old, and I would run around my house screaming this book. Fox, socks, Knox, box. Fox in socks, socks in box. I love this book. And so one day at school, I went to a school called Riverside Child Development Center, built by John D. Rockefeller. And one day at the end of school, I had built this house out of these wooden blocks. And I wanted my mother to see this house and be proud of me when she arrived to pick me up. But unfortunately, this classmate of mine kicked over my house. And I went up to him with the only weapons I had, thinking I was Dr. Seuss. Those were my blocks that you flipped. Lest you want a quick payback, better fix my quick block stack. And he started crying. And when my mother got to school, the teachers were like, Mrs. Alexander, we have a problem. Your son Kwame is arrogant. He intimidates all the other kids with his words. And my mother said, thank you. I believe that poetry can be a way for us to learn how to use our words, for us to find our voice, for us to lift our voice for the things that matter to us. So if my mother was someone who made poetry and words cool and fun, my father was the opposite. He made words functional. My father made me read the dictionary and Funkin' Wagnall's encyclopedia. Y'all don't remember that, do you? You got it free at the grocery store with the purchase. My father made me read his dissertations from Columbia University. I had fallen out of love, and on top of that, my teachers in middle and high school were giving me books that were staid and incomprehensible. And how do you go from Shel Silverstein in like elementary school to Shakespeare? That's a huge leap. My teachers were making me read books like Tuck Everlasting and Anne of Green Gables, which are cool now, but I wasn't interested then, and they called me a reluctant reader, and I was like, I'm not reluctant, I'm just not interested. My father was a very bookish man. Books were his life. My father owned a book publishing company, and I worked for it, being his oldest child. His company was called PCE Book Service. We had to answer the phone at home, peace, may I help you? And when we got to school, our friends would say, why are you answering the phone, police, may I help you? I worked for my father's book publishing company. He went to trade shows and sold books, and I worked behind the table, and you had to sit down, you had to stand up behind the table. You couldn't sit down, you couldn't eat behind the table. You had to read the books, or at least what I did was read the jackets and get to know the books. And there was one particular book fair that my father hosted every Friday after Thanksgiving. It was in New York City. And we were living in Virginia at the time, and so we drive up to New York on Thursday on Thanksgiving morning. And we'd have dinner at Hunan Park 2 on 93rd in Columbus. I got shrimp and lobster sauce. And this one particular Thursday, we're driving in a red Thunderbird, and we're on the turnpike, and I fall asleep. My sisters and I fall asleep in the back seat. My mother falls asleep, and my father falls asleep. And the car turns over 3 times and lands upside down, and we're in the middle of the New Jersey Turnpike, and my father checks in with each one of us, are you okay? And when he gets to me, I say the one thing that I can only think to say in this moment, damn. And my father, who had just fallen asleep at the wheel, and he looked at me and he said, watch your words, Kwame. Now get out the car and pick up all the books that are strewed out of the trunk onto the New Jersey Turnpike. And I crawl out the car, and I'm picking up the books, and I find this one book, and it's really interesting to me because it has a yellow cover, and it's yellow and red and black, and it's just blinding, and it's the greatest. My Story by Muhammad Ali. And so we eventually, the next day, everyone's fine, and we get to this book fair in Harlem, and I'm sitting at the table because my father's teaching a class, so I'm sitting down and I'm looking through this book, The Greatest, and I'm reading it. Over the next 2 days, it's unputdownable because Muhammad Ali was so brash and so confident and so strong and so beautiful, and come to find out, he was a poet. Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, the hands can't hit what the eyes can't see. I done wrestled with alligators and tussled with a whale. I didn't handcuff lightning and throw thunder in jail. And so now I'm like, oh, maybe poetry is the thing that I want to read. Maybe I haven't fallen out of love with reading. Maybe it's that books are amusement parks, and sometimes you got to let kids choose the rides. And no one has let me choose my ride. Well, I'm going to choose my ride. And it's going to be Pablo Neruda and Sonia Sanchez and E.E. Cummings. I carry your heart with me. I carry it in my heart. It's going to be love poems because I'm a sophomore in college, and girls. I went to college to become a doctor. 2 things happened in my sophomore year that changed my life. The first was I encountered a course called organic chemistry. The second was Nikki Giovanni became a professor at Virginia Tech, and I took her class, and I decided I wanted to learn as much about writing poetry and performing poetry and being a poet as I could from her, but our relationship got off to a rocky start after the C- she gave me in advanced poetry, after I sat down in her office protesting that C-, after which she said to me, Kwame, I can teach you how to write poetry, but I cannot teach you how to be interesting. Now get out of my office. And so I graduated from Virginia Tech, and I write a few poetry books, and I've published a few poetry books, and now I'm teaching workshops in the schools program around Washington, D.C., and I'm visiting hundreds of schools, and I'm seeing real life applications of this thing that I know that poetry can do, how it can transform our lives, and because it transformed mine. And I meet a woman, and she's beautiful. And I do the thing that I do when I'm trying to distill the human heart and trying to access what's beautiful about this one precious wild life that we live in. I write a poem for her every day for a year. I am not a painter, browns and blues, we get along. I am not a painter. I am not a painter, browns and blues, we get along, but we are not close. I am no Van Gogh, but give me plain paper, a dull pencil, some scotch, and I will hijack your curves. Take your soul hostage, paint a portrait so colorful and delicate, you just may have to cut off my ear. And guess what, y'all? She married me. And so this poetry thing works, and I'm seeing how it can transform your life and how it's beautiful, and it just, as Langston Hughes said, it distills the whole human heart. And I get invited to speak at a high school in Washington, D.C. called the Maya Angelou Academy. And by this time, I figured out how to utilize my poetry, how to make it significant and how to make it impact. And so I accept this speaking engagement, and I arrive at Maya Angelou Academy. When something's different about this school, there are barbed wires outside of the school. And there's a security desk. And I get there, and I realize this is a juvenile detention facility. I write love poems. I'm not going in there. But I've already accepted this opportunity, and they're paying me, and my wife said, you are going. And so I get ushered through security, and I arrive at the door, and I get to the classroom, and there are guards outside, and they say, you're doing a poetry workshop? And I say, yes, and they say, good luck. And I know that poetry can transform our lives. I know how powerful it is. I've seen it happen, but this is a whole different thing. I don't know if this works. And they put me in the classroom and they lock the door, and there are these kids, most of them who look like me, and they're seated and they're not paying attention. And I'm 90 minutes, I'm gonna be there. And I got up this morning feeling good and black, thinking black thoughts. I did black things like played all my black records and minded my own black business. I put on my best black clothes, walked out my black door, and Lord have mercy, white snow. And a few kids laugh. Maybe one kid wakes up. And I've got like 89 minutes left. And I'm supposed to teach a writing workshop. I'm supposed to teach them about poetry and how it can change their lives because it's changed mine, and I don't know what to do. And so one of the kids says, "Those are nice sneakers you got." And I say, "Oh, thanks. You like my kicks?" "Yeah." "Kick so hot his feet glow. Move so cold you see snow. Tall as a cypress tree, bro. Game so lit, make seeds." And so one of the kids says, "Grow." And I'm like, okay, I got him now. "In your face 3D show. Game so deep, it's below. Air so swift, you breathe slow. Watch me fly from the free throw. Superman is sweet, yo, but Kwame is my hero." And the kids are all in it. And one of the kids in the back of the room goes, "That's poetry!" And for the next 87 minutes, I do a workshop with these kids, and I teach them how to write haiku and tanka, and they're excited, and I leave, and I get home, and my wife says, "How did it go?" And I said, "It was the hardest thing I've ever done and the most rewarding." And she says, "So you're going back?" And I say, "No." That was too hard. I don't do that. And she says, "Oh, that's okay. You don't have to go back because those boys probably aren't expecting you to go back." And so I go back for 6 months, and I teach these boys how to write and publish a book. And when eight or nine of them get out of this juvenile detention facility and they're in a halfway house, they say, "Mr. Alexander, this book that you helped us write and publish, this book," they called it Concrete Dreams. They published a book. "We want to sell the book." And so I give them each 10 copies of the book. I give them each 10 copies of the book. And this little kid in the front who's kneeling, who is now a Starbucks manager, I'm not going to tell y'all where because then y'all will know because it's somewhere in D.C. at Union Station. This kid in the front, his name is Sloan. He calls me one day, he says, "Mr. Alexander, I need to re-up on my poetry books." If y'all don't watch The Wire, you won't know what re-up means. It's drug terminology for when you sell out of drugs and you need more drugs to sell. He says he needs to re-up on poetry books. Wynton Marsalis says that poetry is serious and playful and eternal and divine. I posit that poetry may not be the answer, but it is an answer. And if my mother taught me how to use my words and my father taught me how to make them meaningful, it was Nikki Giovanni who taught me how to make my words dance on the page. In our 37-year friendship, which started very adversarial, ended with her saying I was her literary son. On December 9th, 2024, she passed away. And I found myself seated at her dining room table writing her obituary because her wife Jenny wanted me to do that. And so I'm working on this obituary, and it's like 12 pages long, and it's poetic, and I'm like, ooh, I hope I don't get a C on this. And it's distracting because people are coming over, much like they do when someone has passed away and people are bringing food, and it's too distracting. And so I asked Jenny, may I go sit in Nikki's office? And it's quiet. And I'm thinking, why did I ask that? It's too soon. And finally she says, sure, and I go sit in Nikki's office. And I'm writing the obituary. And it occurs to me that I am writing the obituary about the woman who taught me how to write poetry in the office where she wrote poetry. And I finish it, and I discover on her desk there are 2 iPod shuffles. Do y'all remember those? One's gray, one's lavender. They're these little sort of MP3 players that have no screen, about this big, and they hold 100 songs. You have no idea what order they're in. And she's got 2 iPod shuffles, and I figure out how to charge them, and I get an earphone, and I start listening to them, and I'm discovering the music that she used to love and listen to, and I'm feeling like I'm getting this new relationship with her, and I find out that she loves really sexy music. She's got a lot of Peabo Bryson on this iPod. I probably shouldn't be telling y'all this. And then I hear a poem that I had never heard, that I never knew she wrote, that she recorded with a jazz band. It's called Still Life with Apron. I would like to see you cooking. I would like for you to cook for me. I would like to see you go to the market, pick the fruit and the vegetables and the fish. I would like to see you test the flesh of the fish for firmness and freshness. I would like to see you in the bakery. I would like to see you in the bakery with the dinner rolls, deciding rolls or crusty bread. I would like to see you run back to get the goat butter. I would like to see you not noticing me sitting in the corner while you intent upon making our meal. I would like to see you in the wine store wrestling with red or white. And white, of course, because it's fish, but red is so seductive. And who ever thought of falling in love over a glass of white wine? Poetry is life-giving and it's life-saving. It's the thing that allows us to deal with the heavy, weighty experiences in our lives. That perhaps it's the thing that can save us when the world is not so beautiful, when tomorrow is not certain, when the children no longer read, when the politicians have forgotten how to love. At least we have poetry. A gathering of words, a get-together of ideas, a gathering of emotion, a font of love, hope with wings, poems that help us make this world a better place, one word at a time. Thank you.